100 episodes, a milestone that feels both surreal and deeply humbling. Since that first episode in the spring of 2023, I've had the privilege of sitting down with 86 extraordinary guests. Each brought their own experiences, insights and reflections, pieces of themselves that they were willing to offer so others might feel less alone, more inspired and more connected. In this special episode, I've chosen one key reflection from each amazing guest. After each one, I'll share a couple of questions that came to mind when I listened back through the episode, and I hope will also resonate with you. My hope was simple though. If just one person, one listener, heard something that made them feel seen, it would all be worth it. That's why #JustOnePerson became the heartbeat of this project. Stories that move us, questions that challenge us, and the reminder that we're never alone on this at times crazy, hectic and chaotic, but equally rewarding, mysterious and exciting path we call life. Depth over speed, the art of intentional travel. Listening to Mark Hodgson from Mind and Body Travel share how so many of us book the holidays we think we want, racing through cities, ticking off landmarks, filling our cameras with photos, was a powerful wake-up call. He described how these trips often leave us returning home more drained than restored. What stayed with me was his conviction that the travel we need looks different, slower, more intentional, designed to reconnect us with ourselves and the people we care about. Sometimes it takes someone like Mark to remind us that rest, reflection, and meaning can't be rushed. His story made me wonder how often I confuse movement with fulfillment, and whether my own plans are nourishing or just distracting. His perspective is a beautiful reminder that when we choose depth over speed, we give ourselves the chance to feel truly renewed. A couple of questions to ponder. What kind of travel actually leaves you feeling rested and inspired? If you planned your next trip around what you need, what would that trip look like? From rock bottom to radical ownership. Listening to Jet Xavier describe waking up handcuffed to a hospital bed after a near-fatal overdose and learning he was being charged with manslaughter felt almost surreal. He was only 17, facing a future that most people never recover from. Yet instead of surrendering to bitterness or going back to the streets, he chose to take responsibility for every part of his life. Even though it took decades, that decision to own his story instead of blaming others became the turning point. It made me reflect on the places in my own life where I'm still making excuses rather than owning my actions. Where in your life are you still blaming others for your current situation? What would it look like to take radical ownership over your past and your future? Imperfect action, showing up before you're ready. Karen Pereira's story was a beautiful reminder that you don't have to be perfect to make a difference. So often we hold ourselves back, convinced we need to have it all together before we begin. But she showed that you can start messy, show up uncertain, and still create impact far beyond what you can see. Her courage to be imperfect and keep going anyway inspired me to look at my own fears differently. Maybe the need for perfection is really just another disguise for self-doubt. She proved that action matters more than readiness, and that the people we help rarely care if we figured it all out. They just need us to show up as we are. What dream are you delaying because you don't feel ready? How might imperfection be exactly what someone else needs to see in you? Pride in your roots fuels resilience. Moana Jr spoke so movingly about carrying his Cook Islands heritage everywhere he goes. He described how even hearing his name announced in the ring feels like paying tribute to his grandfather and all the people who have come before him. That deep sense of identity seems to be what gives him strength to keep going, even when training is relentless or results don't come easily. His example reminded me that knowing where you come from can become an unshakable anchor. What parts of your heritage or upbringing are you most proud of? How can you honor those roots in your daily life and work? The courage to keep reinventing yourself. Listening to my mum, Penelope Simpson, describe her journey from a young woman leaving England for Australia to decades working in the disability sector to becoming a life coach and virtues facilitator was quietly inspiring. She shared how every season of her life brought new challenges and new opportunities to learn about herself. Even in retirement, she sees herself as a work in progress. It made me think how often we assume we should have everything figured out by a certain age, when in reality, self-discovery is lifelong. Where in your life are you being called to rediscover or reinvent yourself? What outdated beliefs are you ready to leave behind? How might you approach the next chapter with curiosity instead of fear? Turning grief into purpose. Listening to Matt Britton share how he promised his dad he would do something big before he passed away, and then founding Trail to Triumph was deeply moving. What started as a way to honour his father has grown into an ultramarathon event raising hundreds of thousands of dollars for mesothelioma research and support. It struck me how grief can become an engine for good when we decide to channel it into service. Matt's story made me wonder what is possible when we allow loss to open us up instead of shutting us down. Is there something painful in your life that could be transformed into purpose? How can you turn a personal challenge into a gift for others? It takes courage to trust your gut and ask the question. Wade Hurst explained how often people sense that something isn't right with a friend, colleague, or family member, but hold back from asking really struck me. He described how even experienced managers and leaders can feel uncertain or afraid they'll say the wrong thing. Yet when someone finally says, "Hey, I've noticed you don't seem yourself," it can be the very thing that interrupts a downward spiral. His reminder that it's better to show you care imperfectly than to say nothing at all really resonated with me. Who in your life might need you to check in on them and see how they're really doing? What holds you back from starting that conversation? And what could help you to make that first step? Belonging begins within. Keri Gokul shared how she went from feeling like she didn't belong to fully embracing her own path. It was such a beautiful reminder that belonging always starts from within. She described the exhaustion of trying to fit into spaces that never felt like home, and the freedom that came when she stopped apologizing for who she really was. Her story made me reflect on the places where I still try to change myself to meet expectations that don't align with my values. Keri proved that when you stop chasing external validation, you finally create space to discover where you truly belong. Where are you still trying to fit in at the cost of your authenticity? What would it look like to trust that you are enough just as you are? Parenting by example, lessons in presence. When my brother Paul Hodgson reflected on parenting, he made me pause and think about the silent lessons we teach just by the way we show up. He spoke about how often we believe we need to teach our kids everything, but in reality, they are the ones who teach us how to be present, patient, and more human. His reminder that our children watch not just what we say, but who we are was both humbling and inspiring. It made me wonder, what example am I setting, even in the smallest moments when I think no one is paying attention? What qualities are you modeling for the people that look up to you? What would it look like to learn from those that you're supposed to teach? The courage to unlearn and rebuild. One of the most moving parts of the conversation with Anita Sedleka was when she described her dark night of the soul, realizing she didn't know who she truly was, separate from cultural expectations and old patterns. Rather than running from that discomfort, she chose to sit in it, question everything, and rebuild her identity from the inside out. It made me reflect on how often we inherit beliefs about love, success, and worthiness without ever asking if they're truly ours. What beliefs were handed to you that no longer serve you? Where might you feel ready to start again? Even if it feels a little bit scary. Becoming the spark of belief for others. Erik Bailey in his episode shared how his adoptive parents chose him, the child who was damaged the most, and when he spoke about that, it was incredibly moving. He described how their belief in him was the spark that lit everything that followed. Sometimes all it takes is one person who sees something in you that you can't yet see in yourself. His story made me wonder who in my own life might be waiting for someone to offer that same belief and encouragement. His example is a powerful reminder that when we choose to see the potential in others, we give them a reason to start believing too. Who in your life might need to hear that you believe in them? When has someone else's belief helped you grow beyond what you ever thought was possible? Leading while learning. Ruth Kent's story reminded me that you don't have to have it all together to be an example for others. She was so honest about her struggles and how she used them to help people heal. Her willingness to lead from a place of imperfection made me realize that vulnerability can be the most powerful kind of influence. Maybe the most impactful leaders aren't the ones who pretend to have all the answers, but those who show us what's possible even while they're still figuring it out themselves. Where are you holding back in your life because you think you need to be perfect first? How might your openness about a struggle in your life help someone else? The messy middle as a catalyst. Greg Scheinman's honesty about feeling stuck in the messy middle of the life resonated with me so much for what I've been going through and my journey over recent years. He described how even when you have success on paper, you can still feel restless and hungry for something deeper. His reminder that midlife doesn't have to be a crisis, it can be a catalyst. What if the questions I'm asking now aren't signs of failure, but invitations to reinvent? His story proves that the next chapter can be the most meaningful one if we're willing to lean into curiosity instead of fear. What would happen if you treated your current season as a beginning and not the end? What small action could you take to explore what's next? The healing power of presence. Kate Stossel's story about stepping back to understand her son's needs instead of rushing to fix everything was such a powerful lesson in presence. She shared how hard it was to sit in the discomfort of not having all the solutions, and how transformative it became to simply be there without judgment. It made me think about how often I default to fixing, when the most healing thing I can offer is my full attention. She reminded me that presence is sometimes the greatest gift we can give. Where in your life are you trying to fix instead of just listening? How might your relationships shift if you gave more space for others to be heard? Clarity through imperfect action. Morgan Nelson's journey from feeling directionless to building a life of impact reminded me that clarity rarely arrives all at once. He shared how taking imperfect action, even when he was uncertain, became the catalyst for discovering his purpose. It's so tempting to wait for the whole plan to appear before we start, but he showed that momentum is built step by step. His story inspired me to ask where I might be delaying progress simply because I'm afraid to begin without a roadmap. Where have you been waiting for clarity instead of creating it? How might imperfect action move you closer to your purpose? From uncertainty and fear to gratitude and presence. Listening to Cherie Canning share the story of her daughter Chloe's birth and the NICU journey was deeply humbling. Despite the overwhelming uncertainty and fear, she and her husband Andy found ways to stay present, focus on gratitude, and build strength day by day. Cherie's openness about how isolating and emotionally draining that season was, and how she eventually transformed it into a foundation of resilience, reminds me that even in the hardest chapters, we can look for small wins and moments of hope. When you face uncertainty, how do you ground yourself in the present? What small daily practices help you build resilience? Resilience, learning to stand in the fire. Glenn Azar's commitment to helping young people develop resilience was inspiring. He shared how adversity isn't something we can or even should protect others from. Instead, it's something to prepare for. Glenn described how struggle can forge strength, but only if we learn to face it with curiosity instead of avoidance. His perspective challenged me to look at how often I try to shield myself and the people I care about from discomfort, thinking it's an act of love. But maybe true care is about teaching ourselves and others to stand in the fire and trust that we're capable of walking through it. He reminded me that resilience isn't a trait we're born with. It's something we build choice by choice. Where are you avoiding adversity instead of preparing to face it? How can you help others build resilience without rescuing them? Reclaiming perspective and leading through authenticity. Listening to Chris Robbins talk about Soul Degree, something that I've participated in and experienced myself, I was struck by two powerful ideas. First, he shared how simply stepping into nature, a quiet Vermont forest, a hike through the hills, helps men slow down their nervous systems and reconnect with who they are beneath all the noise. He described how being away from screens and obligations makes space for clarity and honest self-reflection. But equally powerful was how he leads these retreats. Chris doesn't show up as an expert with all the answers. He shows up as a participant, just another man willing to share his own struggles and humanity. Even when he felt pressure to scale Soul Degree into something bigger, he chose to keep it small and intimate because that's what felt most true. His example is such a reminder that transformation often begins with environment and is sustained by authenticity. Sometimes we don't need a grand plan. We just need the courage to step into a quieter place and be honest about what we find there. What environments connect you to what matters the most? What would it look like to build something? Where in your life or work could you lead more by example than by authority? Leaning into discomfort to grow. Paul Watkins is an amazing man. His reflections on embracing discomfort to find growth resonated with me deeply. He talked about how transformation rarely happens in the moments when we feel safe and certain. It begins when we step into the places we'd rather avoid, the hard conversations, the uncertain decisions, the quiet work of changing old patterns. His story was a powerful reminder that avoiding discomfort doesn't protect us. It keeps us stuck. Paul showed that when you lean into the edges of what feels possible, you discovered capacities you never knew you had. Where are you resisting discomfort because it feels safer to stay the same? What might become possible in your life if you leant into uncertainty instead of avoiding it? Knowing when you're on track or off track in life. Heston Russell has a framework, RAILS, which for him stands for responsibility, authenticity, integrity, leadership, and service. It's how he checks in on whether he's on track or off track. It's a roadmap for self-leadership. He shared that clarity doesn't come from striving for perfection. It comes from having principles you return to when things get messy. Listening to him made me reflect on how often I look for answers outside myself, forgetting that my own values are the compass I truly need. His approach is a reminder that when we anchor ourselves in what matters most, we can navigate uncertainty without losing our way. What personal principles guide you when life feels a little bit chaotic? Where could you create more clarity in your life by understanding and setting your own personal values? He who sweats in training bleeds less in battle. Tom Panos's honesty about how fitness, nutrition, and self-care helped him survive 3 cancer diagnoses was unforgettable. He said if you could bottle exercise, it would outsell every drug on the planet. When the day came that he had to face the fight of his life, he was physically and mentally prepared because he'd done the work. His story is a wake-up call that health is not optional or something we work on later. It's the foundation that supports every part of our lives, especially when the black swan event arrives. If a crisis hit tomorrow, is your body and mind up for the fight? How can you make your health a non-negotiable and a key part of your daily life? Recharging your battery before it's empty. Tim Jack Adams' metaphor about the battery, how we drain and recharge our energy, was such a powerful way to think about our well-being. He reminded me that burnout doesn't happen because we work hard once. It happens because we never give ourselves time to plug back in. Listening to Tim made me reflect on how often during my journey I ignored my own energy levels, believing that if I just push a little harder, everything will work out. But the truth is, you can't run on empty and expect to thrive. His story was a reminder that tending to your energy isn't selfish, it's essential. What does your battery level look like right now? Where could you schedule to recharge your battery before burnout hits? You only grow by stepping into the arena. One of the most compelling moments in the conversation with Jacqueline Nagel was when she said, "Speaking is a contact sport. The only way you get better is in the arena." It was a simple truth, but it landed like a challenge. So many people spend years tinkering with their keynote, perfecting their slides or rehearsing in front of a mirror without ever standing up in front of a real audience. They wait until they feel confident, polished, and bulletproof. But as Jacqueline shared, no amount of preparation can replace the lessons you learn when you actually step onto the stage. You discover how stories land, where people lean in, and where their eyes glaze over. You learn to read a room, recover when you stumble, and trust that your message matters more than perfection. You realize the only way to build skill and courage is to start. Where are you hiding behind preparation instead of taking action? How might you grow if you saw every speaking opportunity as a practice and not a performance? Stroke by stroke, the quiet commitment. Sam Penny's story about swimming the English Channel was more than an athletic feat. It was a lesson in patience, mindset, and quiet commitment. He described how big goals aren't achieved in one heroic effort. They're built stroke by stroke, hour by hour, with a willingness to keep moving forward, no matter how tired you are. His experience made me think about parts of my own life where I expect instant progress and feel frustrated when change is slow. He proved that the most meaningful accomplishments are often the result of steady, consistent effort over time. Where in your life are you expecting quick results instead of trusting the process? What goal could you approach one small step at a time? Honoring the truth of lived experience. One of the themes in Leslie Kruder-Villagassia's story was her insistence that no amount of reading or training can replace the wisdom of lived experience. She spoke about how often in workplaces and personal development spaces, marginalized voices are expected to educate everyone else, while also being told their realities are just limiting beliefs. Her perspective was a potent reminder that you will never fully understand someone else's experience, and that's okay. What matters is being willing to listen without defensiveness or the urge to reframe their story through your own lens. Leslie's work challenges us to stop assuming we know what's best for others and instead create space where the truth is believed and respected. When someone shares an experience you can't relate to, do you feel the need to explain it away? What could it look like to replace curiosity with judgment when listening to others? Redefining success on your own terms. Lauren McGee spoke honestly about growing up with the belief that success was achieving the highest grades and being the best in every area. But through burnout and healing, she discovered that success for her is no longer about ticking boxes or living up to expectations. It's about collaborating with others, sharing her story, and creating positive impact. Her evolution is such an important reminder that the measure of a good life isn't how perfect it looks on paper, it's how aligned it feels inside. Whose definition of success are you living by? What does success truly feel like, not just look like for you? Leading from within. Ruth Lemkin reminded us that leadership starts with how we lead ourselves. She shared how influence isn't about having the loudest voice or the most authority. It's about modeling the values you want others to live by. Her example challenged me to look at where I expect others to change without first looking in the mirror. She proved that when we embody the qualities we admire, integrity, empathy, courage, we create a ripple effect that inspires others to do the same. Leadership isn't a role we play. It's who we choose to be every day. Where are you expecting others to change without modeling that change yourself? How can you lead more intentionally by example this week? Courage without certainty. Rod Tucker described the constant anxiety of his role as an umpire, knowing that any ball could be the one that made him look foolish in front of thousands, even millions. He shared how he learned to let go, trust his instincts, and keep showing up anyway. His story struck me as a reminder that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it looks like standing in the middle of the field, staying present, and making the next call as best you can. He proved that real mastery isn't about perfection. It's about humility, consistency, and the resilience to keep going when all eyes are on you. What does trusting your instincts look like in your daily life? Living without regrets. Linda Kavalin-Popov, one of the founders of the Virtues Project, described sitting beside people in hospice who carried regret heavier than their illness. She reminded me that when the end comes, it's not our possessions or titles that matter. It's whether we showed up with love, forgave others, and lived true to our values. Her story about the Virtues Project, born out of a garage and a shared belief in the goodness within every person, was proof that purpose often begins in the most ordinary places. She challenged me to consider whether I'm living in a way that would leave me at peace if today were my last. What are you holding on today that you would regret if you never let it go? What would it look like to live life in a way that felt complete? Keep showing up. Ryan Moresby White shared some of his story, and it was a vivid reminder that courage isn't just about taking the first leap. It's about showing up again and again when nothing seems to be working. He described how leaving an unaligned life was only the beginning. The real transformation happened in the quiet, relentless choice to keep going. He also shared that sometimes we outgrow the soil we're planted in, and the only way to thrive is to find richer ground. His experience made me reflect on who I surround myself with, and whether those relationships help me grow or keep me stuck. Where in your life are you still trying to bloom in depleted soil? What relationships or environments no longer support your growth? Sliding doors and brave decisions. Stephen Carroll shared his story of narrowly missing the London bus bombing. It was a story that gave me chills. It was a visceral reminder that life can change in an instant, and that sliding door moments often lead us to our most meaningful chapters. He spoke candidly about slipping into victim mode afterwards, feeling stuck and sorry for himself, until Derek Redmond challenged him to stop playing it safe. That conversation became the catalyst for Steve to take bigger risks and build a legacy that reached far beyond his own career. Sometimes what feels like a setback is really an invitation to live braver, bigger, and with more purpose. How could you honor the sliding door moments in your life that created a different path for you? Radical reinvention starts with one step. Lachlan Stewart spoke about hitting rock bottom and deciding to radically reinvent himself. It was personal accountability. That change didn't begin with him having all the answers. It started the moment he accepted full responsibility. He didn't wait for motivation or certainty. He committed to taking one small step towards something better, even when he still felt lost. Over time, those steps became momentum, and the momentum became transformation. His journey reminded me that the patterns we cling to because they're familiar are often the very ones holding us back. What patterns in life are you maintaining because they feel safe? What would it look like to take one step forward towards something new today? Legacy leadership, the ripple effect. Katrina Johnson's idea of legacy leadership really struck me. That our impact isn't measured in accolades, but in the ripple effect of how we treat people. She described it as leaving an impression of increase, where everyone you meet feels more capable and valued because of how you showed up. Her story made me think about the kind of legacy I'm creating each day without even realizing it. She proved that the small, consistent ways we choose to honor others can echo far beyond the moment. What impression are you leaving on the people around you? Where could you be more intentional and creative positive ripples in your life? Vulnerability over validation. Dr. Paul Rivera challenged the old narrative that masculinity is about stoicism and pretending everything is fine. He shared how chasing credentials and external validation never filled his deeper need to feel worthy. It was only when he chose vulnerability, sharing his struggles and aligning his work with his purpose, that his life became fulfilling. His honesty reminded me that real connection is born when we stop measuring ourselves by titles and start living by our values. He proved that vulnerability isn't weakness, it's the doorway to impact and belonging. Where are you still hiding behind credentials and achievement instead of showing your heart? What story of success no longer serves you? Vulnerability over validation. Dr. Paul Rivera challenged the old narrative that masculinity is about stoicism and pretending everything is fine. He shared how chasing credentials and external validation never filled his deeper need to feel worthy. It was only when he chose vulnerability, sharing his struggles and aligning his work with his purpose, that his life became fulfilling. His honesty reminded me that real connection is born when we stop measuring ourselves by titles and start living by our values. He proved that vulnerability isn't weakness, it's the doorway to impact and belonging. Where are you still hiding behind credentials and achievement instead of showing your heart? What story of success no longer serves you? Your heart. What story of success no longer serves you? Trading convenience for freedom. Tracy Sheen reminded us that every time we choose convenience, tapping a card, logging in with Google, accepting cookies, we're trading little pieces of our privacy. She said it so simply: be careful what you're willing to trade for convenience. Her perspective made me realize how often I shrug and think that's just how things are, without questioning the long-term cost. Her story and insights challenged me to consider what boundaries I'm willing to hold, even if it means slowing down. Maybe true freedom isn't about doing everything faster. Maybe it's about deciding what parts of myself I'm not willing to sell. Where are you surrendering your privacy or attention without realizing it? What boundaries could you set to protect your personal data? Giving your money a purpose. Sloan Wilkins' idea that money needs a job was a light bulb moment for me. He shared how, without clear intentions, money will find its own purpose, usually in someone else's pocket. He described how easily we spend on things we don't actually care about because we've never stopped to decide what we want our resources to do. His perspective made me realize that being intentional with money isn't about restriction. It's about aligning spending with our values. His story challenged me to consider where my finances might be drifting without direction. What job do you want your money to have in your life? Real stories over perfect pictures. In a world obsessed with curation and filters, Hugh Kedge reminded us that people connect with people, not perfect pictures. It challenged me to think about where I'm still hiding behind polished versions of myself. Her story was proof that the most magnetic thing we can do is show up as our true, imperfect selves, because that's what people want. They want to see us authentic. They want to see who we really are behind the lens. Where are you still editing yourself to be more acceptable in life? How might authenticity help you connect more deeply with others? Walking away from a 30-year retail career, Jason Banks didn't have a plan, and that was the catalyst for him moving forward. He shared how titles and paychecks had become a mask that hid how exhausted and disconnected he felt. His story reminded me that sometimes the most courageous thing we can do is to step into the unknown and trust that clarity will follow. He proved that letting go isn't failure. It's an act of self-respect. His experience made me reflect on how often we postpone our well-being because we're afraid to leave what's familiar, even when it's costing us our health and happiness. Where are you staying in something that no longer serves you? What would it look like to trust yourself enough to walk away? Wisdom beyond credentials. In the episode with Samir Javad, what I loved most was how he described collecting certificates and chasing courses, only to realize none of it could replace lived experience. He was honest about spending tens of thousands of dollars on programs promising shortcuts to transformation. In the end, the only way forward was to test ideas himself. Samir's story reminded me that wisdom doesn't come from credentials alone. It comes from doing the work, failing, learning, and trusting your own instincts over someone else's blueprint. His honesty made me wonder how often I delay action because I think I need one more qualification before I'm ready. What would it look like to start now and learn through experience? How might trusting yourself be the missing ingredient? Tell me more. The power of listening. One thing that really stayed with me with Nick Mair's story was his conversation with Michael from Lifeline. It wasn't a grand gesture that saved him. It was 3 simple words. Tell me more. Michael didn't try to fix or rush Nick toward the light. He was just there, steady and non-judgmental, holding space for the pain. Nick's experience made me wonder how often I underestimate the power of simply listening without an agenda. Maybe the most healing thing we can offer isn't advice. It's our willingness to stay present in someone else's darkest hour. Who today in your life might need you to check in on them and to truly listen to what they need without trying to fix their situation? What would it look like to trust that your presence is enough in the person's life that you're helping? The courage to be seen. Jackie Lackman shared her story of surviving domestic violence. She described the shame of hiding behind a polished image, showing up in heels and a bright smile, while her world was falling apart behind the scenes. Her courage to step forward and eventually transform her pain into purpose is proof that sometimes the most important thing we can do is to tell the truth even when our voice shakes. In sharing her story, Jackie didn't just free herself, she made it safer for countless others to say, "Me too, I need help." Her experience reminded me that healing doesn't always happen behind closed doors. Often it begins the moment we dare to be seen. What truth have you been hiding? How might sharing your story help someone else feel less alone? Where could you be braver in life showing up just as you are? Mastering the fundamentals. Bill Nelson made it clear that while natural ability helps, it's never enough on its own. He shared how Olympic swimmers with extraordinary gifts became champions not because of talent, because that they were willing to master the fundamentals day after day, year after year. He described the discipline it took to perfect technique, repeat the same drills, and show up fully present no matter how they felt. After the 1992 Olympics, the Australian team set out to become number 1 by 2000, a goal that took 9 relentless years of incremental improvements in mindset, culture, and preparation. It was a simple reminder, but profound. Success is rarely about big, flashy moments. It's about doing the basics exceptionally well, consistently, even when no one is watching. Whether it's in life or business, what fundamentals could you commit to, even if they feel tedious? Where are you quick to look for shortcuts instead of trusting the process? The brutal reality of the lucky country. Norm McGilwray's story forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. In a country as wealthy as Australia, people are still dying on our streets each and every day. He founded Bed Down, and his work showed how bureaucratic inertia can stand in the way of simple, compassionate solutions, like transforming vacant buildings and spaces into places of safety. Listening to Norm describe how quickly someone's health, hope, and mental state deteriorate without shelter was sobering. It reminded me that homelessness isn't an individual failing, it's a collective one. His story challenged me to see the invisible people in my environment and to remember that we all have a role to play in changing the status quo. What small action could you take this month to help people experiencing homelessness? How might you challenge your assumptions on why people end up without a home? Spaces that invite connection. Listening to Stephen Demedio talk about shaking up the tired model of conferences, dark hotel rooms, crammed agendas was so refreshing. He shared how real connection doesn't happen when people are overwhelmed or ticking boxes. It happens when they feel safe to be themselves. He challenges the idea that productivity means cramming more content into less time. Instead, he proved that transformation is possible when we slow down, we step outside, and trust each other enough to be honest about what needs to change. His vision made me think about the spaces I create in my work life, my relationships, and in my own mind, and whether they invite authenticity or just more performance. What's an environment that you could put yourself or your team in that will bring out the very best in them, their ideas and their creativity? Where are you prioritizing productivity over real connection? Saying yes before you feel ready. I was struck by Milton Dick's honesty about imposter syndrome. Even as Speaker of the House of Representatives, he shared that he still has days where he pinches himself, wondering if he belongs. He spoke about the fear of saying the wrong thing, of not knowing all the rules, and the quiet courage it takes to step forward anyway. Milton's story was a reminder that you don't have to feel fully prepared to do something meaningful. Sometimes you only grow into your purpose by saying yes before you feel ready. His example challenged me to consider where I'm holding back, waiting to feel more qualified when maybe it's time to step up and trust I'll figure it out. What would it look like to say yes in your life, in your business, and trust yourself to learn along the way? What part does imposter syndrome hold you back from sharing your knowledge, your experience, and where is it holding you back in your journey? Radical responsibility versus freedom. Kane Hanson's story is proof that life can deal you a rough hand. Divorce, poverty, expulsion. But the moment you stop blaming everyone else is the moment you get your power back. He shared how easy it was to point fingers at his parents or the system, but eventually he realized that staying in that mindset would only guarantee more of the same. His conviction that no one owes you anything was both confronting and freeing. His story reminded me that radical responsibility isn't about blaming yourself. It's about choosing to step into your own agency and take charge of what happens next. Where in your life are you waiting for someone else to rescue you? How might taking full responsibility change the story that you're living? From noise to stillness. Tom Cronin shared his journey from wild, drug-fueled nights in finance to teaching meditation. Completely different ends of the scale. He described how he was constantly chasing more money, more success, more distraction, while feeling emptier each and every day. When he finally sat still, he discovered that what he was searching for wasn't out there. It was already within him. Tom's honesty about the fear of slowing down made me reflect on how often I fill my own life with noise to avoid facing what's underneath. His story is proof that sometimes peace comes not from adding, but subtracting. His words challenge me to consider whether the life I'm building aligns with what truly matters, or if I'm measuring worth by acquisitions instead of alignment. In your life, what are you using to mask and fill the emptiness inside? How might stillness help you to hear what the heart has been trying to say? Grace under pressure. Nicola Byrne described it as her swan mode, gliding gracefully while paddling furiously underneath. It was such a vivid metaphor for leadership. She described how whether it was a last-minute speaker cancellation or orchestrating an awards show with a 37-piece orchestra, the real art was staying calm when everything felt chaotic. Her example reminded me that most people never see the frantic paddling beneath the surface. They see the presence, poise, and faith that it will all come together. Her story challenged me to think about where I let panic dictate my decisions instead of trusting my preparation. Where in your life could you practice more calm under pressure? How might poise change the way that you navigate challenges? As we hit 100 episodes of the podcast, I have a big announcement to share with you. If you've been feeling stuck in the same old patterns, like you're moving through life on autopilot, or as I say, walking on that treadmill of life that just doesn't seem to stop, always showing up for everyone else but wondering, when is it my turn? When do I get to feel clear, grounded, and in control again? I've created and developed something behind the scenes called Beyond the Noise. It's a 12-week coaching and mentoring experience designed to help you reset your habits, clear out the mental clutter, and finally start living in alignment with who you are now, not who you used to be. If you've been waiting for a sign to make a change, then this is it. Send me a DM on Instagram for us to continue the conversation further. This program that I've developed and created behind the scenes incorporates some of what I've learned on my journey, what I've also learned through the podcast, and also things that have helped me move from where I was to where I am now to also where I'm going into the future. So I want to help you, and I'd love to join you on your journey to help you be the best version of yourself. Health as the ultimate non-negotiable. Philip DeBella's definition of success is refreshingly simple. Health first, then enough time and money when you want it. He shared how he sold his business not because he needed more money, but because his doctor told him he was the fittest fat bloke he'd ever met. Hearing him describe how no amount of revenue could justify the cost to his well-being made me reflect on my own journey and what at times I was sacrificing in the name of success. He proved that if your health or your family is paying the price, it's not really success. It's just a shinier version of struggle. What are you trading for success that you can't get back? Where could you prioritize sustainability over achievement? Joy begins within. Christine Denny reminded me that joy isn't something we find out there. It's something we cultivate moment by moment. She shared how, despite anxiety and depression, she still chose to focus her energy on connection, gratitude, and self-love. The story was such a powerful example of being the joy maker, even when it would have been easier to wear a mask. Listening to Christine made me reflect on the times I've pretended everything was fine instead of honoring my real experience. Her example proves that acknowledging your struggles doesn't cancel your joy. It makes it more honest and sustainable. When have you worn a happy mask while struggling inside? How could you create a better space now for real, imperfect happiness? Conflict as connection. What struck me most in the conversation with Scott Dutton was his conviction that conflict isn't something to avoid. It's an invitation to learn and connect. He shared how most of us either dodge difficult conversations or rush in defensively, determined to prove we're right. He reframed conflict as a chance to understand, not to win. His approach challenged me to notice how often I enter disagreements already attached to my story. Listening to Scott made me realize that the discomfort I try to avoid might be exactly what could deepen trust and strengthen relationships. Where are you avoiding a conversation in your life that feels too hard? How could conflict actually become a deeper path to the connection with those around you? The courage to parent imperfectly. In the conversation with Nikki Rasman, she was so honest about never feeling like she had it all figured out as a parent, and her willingness to admit that openly to her kids. Instead of pretending to be perfect, she modeled vulnerability, curiosity, and reflection. Her example challenged me to consider how often I hide my uncertainty because I think it's what's expected. Nikki proved that our children don't need flawless parents. They need parents who are willing to grow alongside them and hold space for their evolving identities. Her story reminded me that parenting isn't a checklist to master. It's a practice in courage and compassion. When was the last time you admitted to your kids that you don't have all the answers? What would it look like to lead with curiosity instead of certainty? Meaning over status. Jonathan Walsh shared how his definition of success has evolved over time. Early in his career, it was about the biggest paycheck and proving himself. But over the years, those external markers began to feel hollow. Now he measures success by completely different standards. Whether his daughters are thriving, whether he's making the world a bit fairer, and whether he's proud of how he spends his days. Listening to Jonathan made me reflect on whether I'm chasing things that actually matter to me, or just chasing what looks impressive. His story is proof that the richest rewards often come from aligning your work with your values, even if it means letting go of old ambitions. What does success look like for you today, and how has that changed from 5 years ago? What would it feel like to measure success by meaning and not status? Do cool shit while you can. Debs Brocklesby has a mantra that became the foundation of her life and business. Life is short, do cool shit. She shared how a bike accident turned everything upside down and forced her to reckon with how she was spending her time. She spoke openly about the pain of losing friendships and longing to get her old self back. But she also described the freedom that came when she realized that no one was coming to rescue her. If she wanted a different life, she had to create it. Her story challenged me to consider what adventures I'm putting off because I assume I'll always have more time. What are you postponing because you think there's always going to be tomorrow? If today was your last chance, what would you regret not doing? From vanity metrics to real stability. John Knight's reminder that sales are vanity, profit is sanity, and cash is reality couldn't have been clearer. In a world where entrepreneurs measure success by revenue and appearances, he challenged me to ask whether I actually understand the true health of what I'm building. He described how often business owners chase growth without checking if it's sustainable. His advice to regularly review your finances line by line was so simple, but so powerful. John made me realize that feeling busy and successful isn't the same as creating something stable. Real freedom comes from knowing exactly where you stand and making decisions with clear eyes. How well do you really know your numbers behind your goals? Where might you be chasing vanity metrics instead of sustainable progress? Designing a life worth living. Listening to Dr. Fred Gross, I was struck by his unwavering commitment to designing what he calls a life worth living. He believes we each have the power to fill our days with experiences that bring us joy, meaning, and purpose. His philosophy is simple but confronting. Most people drift through life without ever clarifying what lights them up. Dr. Fred challenges us to be deliberate, to fill our days with our 10s, 25s, 50s, and 100s, and to refuse to settle for mediocrity. His story made me ask whether I'm living by design or by default. What are 3 simple joys that could make your day today a 10 out of 10? What's one aspect of your life that you'd redesigned if you believed it was possible? Success on your own stage. Tom Cardy, or more well known as Tom Mack, had an idea that success isn't about streaming numbers, viral moments, or standing on the biggest stage. It's about playing the songs that matter to you and connecting with people who see themselves in your stories. He shared how he resisted country music for years because it didn't feel cool, and how liberating it was to finally embrace what felt authentic. Tom's honesty challenged me to think about what parts of myself I've suppressed to fit in. His journey proved that you don't need anyone's permission to pursue what lights you up. Listening to Tom was a reminder that the most satisfying success is the kind you define yourself, even if it looks nothing like what the world expects. Where are you still trying to be what you think others want you to be? What would it look like to stand fully in your own story? You are more than what happens to you. Gideon Mzembe's story is proof that you are not your circumstances or your past mistakes. From fleeing civil unrest to substance abuse to building a business, he has continually rewritten his story. He reminded me that worth isn't something others can give or take away. It's something we claim by the way we show up again and again, no matter what we've been through. His journey challenged me to consider where I'm still letting old labels define me and what it might feel like to step beyond them. What titles, labels, or stories have you outgrown in your life? Where are you still letting circumstances define you? Doing good feels good. A bloody good human, Simo Braun, shared a powerful reminder that helping others doesn't just change their lives, it transforms ours. Even in his darkest times, navigating divorce, career upheaval, and single parenting, donating plasma and blood became an anchor. He described how giving back helped him feel useful and connected again. His mission to inspire others to roll up their sleeves proves that you don't have to be extraordinary to make an extraordinary difference. Listening to Simo made me wonder what small contribution I could make that would matter more than I realize. Where could you make a small difference that feels bigger than you expect? When was the last time you helped someone without expecting anything in return? The power of emotional intelligence. Brianna May shared that emotional intelligence isn't a soft skill, it's a survival skill. She spoke about how the education system often prioritizes IQ over EQ, standardized tests over self-awareness. Her vision of a world where schools teach kids how to regulate emotions, process shame, and develop resilience made me imagine how different my own life could have been with those tools earlier on. Listening to Brianna made me realize that empathy and curiosity are every bit as important as academic success, and that it's never too late to learn them. How might your life have changed if you'd learnt emotional intelligence sooner? Where can you model and teach EQ to those around you? Reclaiming your identity. Gary Fay shared a powerful insight about identity. For years, he was defined by what he did, not who he was. When it all fell apart, he was forced to rebuild himself from the inside out. Today, success isn't about status or money. It's about living as close as possible to the person he was consciously chosen to become. His story reminded me that when we anchor our identity in something deeper than achievements, we finally find peace. His journey is proof that even when the roles fall away, who we are remains, and that is more than enough. If your job or role disappeared tomorrow, who would you be without it? What would it look like to judge your worth in who you are and not what you do? The power of choosing your own story. What I really loved about Di Foster's story is how consciously she chose the narrative she wanted to live by. When she was given a terminal diagnosis and told she had 365 days left, she didn't surrender to bitterness. Instead, she asked herself, if I've only got 365 days to live, how do I want to spend them? Her answer was to choose joy, presence, and doing life her way. Di's example is proof that while we can't always control what happens to us, we can control the story we tell ourselves themselves about it, and that choice shapes everything. Listening to her made me wonder what stories I've been telling myself about my own life and which ones I might be ready to rewrite. If you were given a terminal diagnosis today, what would you want your next 365 days to look like? If you could rewrite your story, what parts of it would you change? Betting on yourself one step at a time. Travis Island's story is proof that when you stop betting on everything and everyone else and finally decide to bet on yourself, everything can change. When he hit rock bottom, no money, no trust, no self-respect, he didn't keep spiraling. Instead, he started running. It wasn't just exercise, it was medicine, a way to reclaim his sense of purpose and worth. Each step was an act of rebuilding. His journey reminded me that you don't have to know exactly where you're going. Sometimes it's enough to just keep moving, do the next right thing, and trust that you are worth the effort. Where are you currently avoiding the truth about your choices? How might it feel to finally bet and go all in on yourself? Thriving beyond the system. One of the most powerful insights in the conversation with Michelle Scher was that the healthcare system isn't designed to help us thrive. It's designed to keep us just okay. She spoke about how real well-being often requires curiosity, self-advocacy, and stepping outside the box. She described how learning to listen to her body and explore alternative approaches became the key to true health. Her story challenged me to ask where I've been outsourcing my well-being to others instead of taking ownership. It was a reminder that thriving demands more than ticking boxes. It demands radical self-inquiry. What part of your health have you been outsourcing to the system? What would it look like to take full ownership of your wellness and well-being in your health journey? Reality TV as a mirror. Yana Firestone's reflections on reality TV were fascinating. She acknowledged that it can be pure escapism, but also a mirror that reveals our own values, triggers, and dreams. She shared how watching other people's vulnerability and conflict often helped her better understand her own reactions. Her perspective challenged me to consider that entertainment doesn't always have to be mindless. It can also be a way to reflect on who we are as a person. Her story reminded me that self-awareness sometimes shows up in unexpected places. Have you actually thought deeper on the reality TV shows that you watch? Are you watching them to escape, or are you watching them because it's a mirror of your own life? How do you relate or judge the people that you see on screen? The power of small wins. Adam Bloom was rebuilding his life after his darkest days. He didn't start with big, dramatic changes. He started by getting out of bed one day and making a cup of coffee. Those tiny wins created momentum that eventually transformed everything. His story was a reminder that healing isn't one heroic leap. It's a series of small, deliberate steps that prove to yourself you're still here and still worthy of hope. Listening to Adam made me question how often we all dismiss small efforts as not enough, when they're really the foundation for something bigger. In life, are you just celebrating the big wins? What about the small wins that you've achieved recently? How might celebrating those little wins really set up momentum into bigger and better things ahead? The cost of carrying it all. Listening to Nadine Muller's story, I was struck by the price she paid for believing she had to be everything to everyone. For years, she was the rescuer, the achiever, the one who never stopped moving. Eventually, life handed her a collision so big she could no longer outrun it. Her journey to surrender, stillness, and self-reconnection was proof that sometimes the strongest thing we can do is stop and put the load down. Her story challenged me to notice where I'm carrying more than is mine to hold, and what it might look like to finally release it. What weight are you carrying in life that may actually not be yours to hold? How might surrender create a space for real healing? The ripple effect of compassion. John Stevens' story is a testament to what happens when one person dares to ask, "How can I help?" Instead of waiting for the perfect plan, him and his wife Made in Bali started by teaching English to one person, eventually creating schools that have impacted hundreds and thousands. His example challenged me to stop believing that making a difference requires having it all figured out. John proved that consistent, imperfect action can build movements that change lives and communities. His story reminded me that the question isn't whether you're ready, it's whether you care enough to start anyway. What small step could you start today in your local community that could make a big difference? How might that one decision and your willingness to start inspire others to do the same? Running out of Saturdays. Peter Brewer's idea that we're all running out of Saturdays hit me right between the eyes. He's dedicated over 4 decades to the real estate industry, from a real estate agent to now the chairman of the REIQ. And obviously, I had a long career in real estate. Running out of Saturdays hits me hard because Saturdays was a day where I had to sacrifice so much. And he shared how no matter how successful we are, our Saturdays are finite. And every week is another chance to decide what matters most. Listening to him describe how slowing down to reflect, write, and be present made me question how many of my own Saturdays in my life I've wasted on things that don't actually matter. It was a reminder that was simple but profound. What would you change if we treated each Saturday as one of our last? The deeper question here is not what you're doing with your Saturdays, but what are you doing each day that you may regret down the track? How might you start living with more intention and urgency? Claiming the dream you hid. It's a story that Scott Green reminded me of. How often we bury what we love because it feels impractical or embarrassing. As a kid, he was afraid to admit he loved pro wrestling and that one day he wanted to be a pro wrestler. Even in university, he hid his passion while studying psychology. Eventually, he chose honesty over approval and dropped out to pursue wrestling full time. His story is proof that hiding from your dreams doesn't make them disappear. It only delays the moment you finally claim them. Scott made me wonder what parts of myself I'm still keeping in the shadows because it feels safer than admitting what I really want. What dream have you been hiding because it feels too risky to share? What would it look like to stop seeking approval and start seeking truth? The courage to walk away. One of the most powerful themes in Andrew White's story was the courage it took to leave situations that looked successful but were quietly destroying him inside. After experiencing bullying and burnout, he tried to fix his unhappiness by collecting milestones, a house, a car, a dream, even an accolade. But none of it worked until he finally asked, what does a life of integrity look like for me? Andrew proved that sometimes walking away isn't failure. It's the first step towards freedom. His story reminded me what looks like stability from the outside can be suffocating if it doesn't align with who we truly are. Where are you staying because it feels safer than leaving? What would it look like to let go and make space for something better? Simplify to amplify. Loz Antonenko has lived through more in one lifetime than most of us could imagine. Illness, loss, burnout, reinvention. But if there's one lesson she embodies, it's that simplicity is the path to freedom. Her mantra, simplify to amplify, is about stripping away everything that doesn't serve you so you can focus on what matters most. She shared how 5 daily non-negotiables, eating well, breathing consciously, prioritizing sleep, moving mindfully, and staying hydrated, became the simple habits that helped her rebuild her life. Her story reminded me that it's usually the smallest, most consistent choices that change everything. Where are you overcomplicating your life or goals? Which of Loz's non-negotiables could you focus on this week? The courage to reinvent yourself. Leanne Hughes' journey from shy bookworm to international facilitator is a testament to reinvention. She shared how she kept saying yes to the next stretch opportunity, whether it was playing netball despite hating team sports, leaving corporate life, or launching a podcast with no roadmap. Her story reminded me that reinvention isn't one big leap. It's a mindset. It's about being willing to be a beginner again and trusting that curiosity will lead you somewhere worth going. She proved that you don't have to know how it will all turn out. You just have to be brave enough to start. Where do you feel ready for reinvention in your life? How might it feel to give yourself permission to begin again? The courage to reinvent yourself. Leanne Hughes' journey from shy bookworm to international facilitator is a testament to reinvention. She shared how she kept saying yes to the next stretch opportunity, whether it was playing netball despite hating team sports, leaving corporate life, or launching a podcast with no roadmap. Her story reminded me that reinvention isn't one big leap. It's a mindset. It's about being willing to be a beginner again and trusting that curiosity will lead you somewhere worth going. She proved that you don't have to know how it will all turn out. You just have to be brave enough to start. Where do you feel ready for reinvention in your life? How might it feel to give yourself permission to begin again? Listening to your body's clues before it's too late. Listening to Joel Ludwig describe how he finally connected the dots between what he ate and how he felt was incredibly powerful. He shared how years of bloating, brain fog, and lethargy turned into clarity and energy when he discovered he needed to change his diet. His story was a reminder that our bodies often send signals long before we pay attention. Sometimes we just need the right person, a skilled dietitian or mentor, to help us see what's been there all along. Joel's journey challenged me to consider where in my own life I might be ignoring the obvious clues. What symptoms have you normalized instead of investigating? If there was one expert that you could reach out to today that would help you on your health journey, who would that be? The kitchen as a sanctuary. Zach Green's story reminded me that healing doesn't always happen in therapy rooms. Sometimes it happens in the spaces where we feel most ourselves. For him, that space was the kitchen. Cooking wasn't just a career, it was a refuge when grief and trauma felt too big to name. Over time, it became the place he could slow down, find purpose and share joy with others, even when he didn't feel it himself. His story made me reflect on where I find my own sanctuary and how I could create more space for it. Where is your sanctuary when life feels overwhelming? What activities make you feel grounded and present? Redefining success and filling your own cup. One of the most powerful moments for Danielle Richards is when she realized that success wasn't measured by how much she had to sacrifice. For years, she believed that putting herself last was somehow noble, but burnout taught her that you can't pour from an empty cup. Today, she defines success differently, having the energy to be present for her husband, her son, her clients, and more importantly, herself. Her journey is proof that you don't have to trade your well-being for achievement. You just have to be brave enough to set boundaries and choose sustainability over approval. Where in your life are you giving from an empty cup? What small habit could help you protect your energy this week? Authenticity as your superpower. From hiding her face when she sang to standing confidently on national television, Tori Dark's story is proof that authenticity is the most magnetic quality of all. She shared how singing pop songs to please others only drained her energy. When she finally embraced her true voice, everything shifted. Her journey reminded me that when we stop trying to fit a mold, the right people find us. Tori proved that your tribe shows up when you show up as yourself unapologetically. Where are you still trying to be someone you're not? When you remove the masks that you wear, who is it that you are authentically? Self-care isn't selfish. Chelsea Pottinger shared how for years she believed that taking time to rest, exercise, or set boundaries was self-indulgent. But after severe postnatal depression, she reframed self-care as self-preservation, the opposite of selfish. She described how her non-negotiables, quality sleep, daily movement, meditation, and boundaries, became the anchors that allowed her to keep showing up for her family and her mission. The story reminded me that when we take care of ourselves, we don't just thrive personally, we create more capacity to care for everyone around us. Where are you sacrificing your self-care? How might your life change if you saw self-care as a priority and an act of self-service? Nobody's coming. One of the most confronting moments in Dane Muller's story was when his wife told him as he was sitting in the shower, "Nobody's coming." At first, he hated hearing it, but later he realized it was the most loving thing anyone had ever said to him. It forced him to stop outsourcing his healing and take ownership of his own life. Dane's journey is proof that while no one can save us, connection can inspire us to save ourselves. His story reminded me that sometimes the people who love us most are the ones willing to say the hardest truths because they can see who we can become. Where are you still waiting for someone to rescue you? Is today the day you look in the mirror and start learning to love yourself? How do you want to live? Andrew Jobling reminded me that the most important question isn't, what do you want to do? It's how you want to live. He described working 100-hour weeks, buried in debt and burnout, until he finally asked, is this it? And what would a life I actually love look like? That moment of honesty became the catalyst for everything that followed. His story proves that clarity creates change, and that you don't have to keep surviving on autopilot when you could be just building something better. Where are you settling for survival instead of designing a life that you love? If you look at your life today and it's not one that you love, as you sit there, what does a life you love actually look like? How does it light you up inside each day? The cave you fear to enter. Kevin Humphreys shared that the most defining moment of his life wasn't flying into war zones. It was stepping onto a stage to admit he was struggling. For years, he hid his story, convinced that telling the truth would end everything he'd ever built. But when he finally spoke, instead of rejection, he was met with connection and acceptance. His story is proof that the cave you feared to enter often holds the treasure you're seeking. For him, that was belonging, freedom, and a life that no longer required pretending. What's the cave you fear to enter in your own life? What might be possible in your life if you stopped hiding your struggle? Boundaries begin with you. Cindy McCoy's story is proof that before we can create healthy relationships with anyone else in our life, we have to create healthy boundaries within ourselves. She described how getting enough sleep, choosing nurturing environments, and setting clear limits became the foundation for everything else in her life. Her example challenged me to consider where I'm abandoning myself in the name of pleasing others, and how I might start treating myself like someone worth protecting. Where are you neglecting yourself to keep others happy? What's one small boundary that you could focus on this week? Boundaries begin with you. Cindy McCoy's story is proof that before we can create healthy relationships with anyone else in our life, we have to create healthy boundaries within ourselves. She described how getting enough sleep, choosing nurturing environments, and setting clear limits became the foundation for everything else in her life. Her example challenged me to consider where I'm abandoning myself in the name of pleasing others, and how I might start treating myself like someone worth protecting. Where are you neglecting yourself to keep others happy? What's one small boundary that you could focus on this week? The superpower of vulnerability. Sean Phillip believes vulnerability isn't a weakness, it's a superpower. He shared how standing in front of a room full of young men and admitting he didn't have it all together was the most courageous thing he'd ever done. His story reminded me that when one person is brave enough to share, it gives everyone else permission to drop the mask. Sean proved that the connection we're craving begins the moment we allow ourselves to be seen. Where are you hiding parts in your story because you feel you have to be strong? Who could you help today by sharing your truth? Burnout showed up as a numbness and disconnection. Both Laura McGee and Jason Marshall's stories reminded me that burnout isn't just an individual crisis, it's a collective one. They described how in their own relationship, burnout showed up as numbness and disconnection. It wasn't until they started asking each other simple, honest questions. How can I help you right now? Their example proves that healing happens when teams and families create cultures of shared care and vulnerability. Nobody is meant to do this alone, and nobody has to. Where are you expecting others in your life to manage alone? Whether it's your partner or someone close to you today, how powerful would it be asking the question, how can I be there for you right now? Before we wrap up today's episode, I hope that there was a spark ignited within you. Whether it was a story, a question, a reflection, or something that ignited a passion or purpose that will light the path on your journey moving forward. It's easy to live life showing up for everyone else, but not stopping for a second to actually ask yourself what you actually need. I'd love to help you turn the page in your own story and start writing what resonates with you, what aligns and feels right. I want to take you beyond the noise, a place where we press pause, cut through the mental clutter and press reset. It's not just coaching or mentoring, it's structure, accountability, and the space to finally get back to clarity and connection with yourself. If your gut has been telling you to break out of the overwhelm, the mundane, and get your spark back, then it's time to take the next step. Feel free to send me a DM and let's continue the conversation on Instagram. The next intake starts soon, and I'd love to join you in your next chapter as you turn the page on your story. The healing power of humor. Jordana Borenstein's story proves that humor isn't just entertainment, it's therapy. She described how a disastrous date became the catalyst for her comedy career. Simply retelling the story and exaggerating it for her friends made her feel lighter. She shared that when we can laugh at something, it loses its power over us. Humor transforms pain into something shareable, a reminder that we don't have to take ourselves or life so seriously. Her story inspired me to look for ways to bring more playfulness to the places where I feel stuck. What recent challenge or struggle could you reframe with humor? How might laughter help you release some of the pressure that you're holding? The power of stories to spark hope. Keri Atherton had an idea to create stories of hope. It came when she saw a man who had lost everything still show up to inspire others. She realized that sharing our darkest chapters doesn't diminish us. It can be the most powerful gift we give. Her experience shows that when we hear someone say, "Me too," shame loses its grip and hope becomes possible again. Who in your life has shared their truth or their story to make you feel less alone? How could you create spaces in your business or in your life that allows people to speak their truth